We're finding that Nevada is a very responsive state that I think our message is going to continue to hit home for a lot of voters here.
From the Las Vegas Review-Journal, this is RJ Politics.
And I'm thrilled to be back in Nevada.
Hello, Nevada.
We're governor for all the state of Nevada.
I have more energy than a pack of wolves.
Nevada is enormously important.
So this is Rory Appleton, politics reporter for the Review-Journal, here with South Bend, Indiana Mayor and 2020 presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. Thanks for taking the time.
Good to be with you.
Absolutely. So you're back in Nevada. As I was just saying before we started recording, we last spoke in August, and one of the questions I had asked was, if we should expect to see more of you, if we should expect to see more people in nice orange shirts with your name on them here. And since then, I think you've been here 3 times in the last month. You have 10 offices in the state now. So just tell me about your operations in the state.
Yeah, so we've scaled up. We got 10 offices, about 3 dozen organizers, and a wonderful network of volunteers and supporters. We're finding that Nevada is a very responsive state that I think our message is going to continue to hit home for a lot of voters here. Approaching the caucuses, I think the biggest question on most folks' minds is, how is my life going to change if you become the president versus one of the others? And we've laid out a message that explains how we're going to focus on making sure the economy works for everybody, getting everybody health care without kicking you off your private plan, keeping America safe around the world, and all of the other things that are really on the minds of individuals as they size up this Democratic field. But what matters also is the ground game, making sure that we form the relationships, build out that volunteer base, get out on the phones and on the doors and all the ways that we can to engage as many people as possible going into those caucuses.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask just a little bit. I mean, you guys were into the state later. You had a late start. You didn't have the base building up. And you've been, playing a little bit of catch up. How do you think that that's gone? Just not necessarily just in Nevada, but across the whole country.
Well, the curve was a little different from us. Us, in January, we had about 4 people involved in this entire operation. Nobody even knew how to say my name. And so we always knew that our trajectory was going to be a little different. But what we found, again, is that our message is really landing here. People are excited for what I'm offering. And especially when people think about what this country's going to need the day after Donald Trump leaves office. After all, we're all auditioning to be the president who comes after. And this country is going to be torn up. It's going to be divided. We're going to need somebody who can unify the country and take real steps to get things done on these problems that we've been dealing with for years. And what I'm finding is that more and more voters look to me and this campaign as the solution to that. So we've grown out what I think is now the biggest, certainly I believe the best team on the ground in Nevada for any presidential candidate. And I believe that's going to power us through to a victory when the caucuses come.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there, just to kind of summarize, it kind of sounds like you're talking about sort of a pragmatic president, sort of a pragmatic approach to the campaigning. What is it specifically that you think that that you can offer that many of the other Democratic candidates can't?
Well, I think when you come at it from outside of Washington, when you have the mentality of a mayor, you think a lot more about how to get things done. We are proposing big and bold ideas. When I talk about Medicare for all who want it, that will be the biggest thing to change in American healthcare in 50 years. When we look at what actually has to happen in order to move forward on climate and beat the deadlines that the scientists are giving us to have real action. These are very bold actions, but also, in my view, being bold doesn't have to be divisive. There is a new American majority on issues from gun law to immigration, where Democrats used to be on defense. Most Americans agree with us on the big questions, as well as issues like healthcare, wages, family leave, taxes, issue after issue, where, frankly, the Democratic message has been the right one all along, but we haven't always gotten it out effectively.
I want to talk a little bit about the Medicare for all who want it. We talked about it the last time. You sort of sold it as kind of a bridge, basically. You made it sound like that you have, clearly you have supported a single payer option in the past, and that you do think that ultimately it might go that way. But the way you last articulated to me, I just want to see if it's still the same plan, is that, you would give people that choice, and you would let the market dictate, and sort of, you think that eventually we would get to sort of a single payer system. Is that still the case?
That's right. I think anyone who uses a phrase like Medicare for all has a responsibility to talk about what it actually takes to get there. And I think the answer is to take a version of Medicare, make it available to everybody. That's why I call it Medicare for all who want it. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, if for some reason you would prefer to stay on a private plan, I'm thinking about a lot of the culinary workers and other union members and labor members here, for example, who negotiated very good plans. Well, we're not going to force you to give it up. Now, I still think that the public alternative we create is going to be the best one, which means people will gradually choose it until it's the only game of town. But if for some reason that at least for some Americans it's better to stay with a different plan, well, then we're going to be really glad we didn't force everybody over. My vision is to give you the choice and allow this to play out in a way that makes sense for individual Americans, making the right decisions for them and for their family's health.
So part of the discussion that's been going on in about the last week, I mean, you came out pretty heavily against, not necessarily against Medicare for all, but you were very, very, I wouldn't say very, but you were a little bit on Elizabeth Warren, I think, over, her being sort of unable to or refusing to explain exactly how her plan would be paid for. Mm-hmm. But also you sort of, you took a little bit of aim at Bernie Sanders as well for taking that choice away. I wanted to ask, though, because Bernie Sanders mentioned this during the debate, what about the uninsured? What about the thousands of people who die every year because they are uninsured, they're underinsured? What about the undocumented? What about homeless folks? What does your plan do for them?
Well, that's the point. In our vision, nobody is uninsured. We make sure that you can't fall through the cracks. We'll even retroactively enroll people onto this Medicare for all who want it plan if they had been without insurance. The idea for me is the most important thing is making sure you get insured. It's not making sure that the government's doing the insuring. I think that the public option can do a better job. But the most important thing is that one way or the other, you get coverage. And in our plan, everybody does.
So how do you differentiate then between people who would have to buy into a public option and people who would automatically be enrolled and be eligible for healthcare without any cost?
Well, that's where the subsidies become so important. So we recognize that right now there are a lot of people who can't afford good health insurance. It's why I'm setting a cap of 8.5% of your income as the most that the premium could be. And for low-income folks, you're going to continue to see the kind of subsidies that we use in order to make sure, for example, through the Affordable Care Act or Medicare, Medicaid, that everybody in those income categories is able to be enrolled. We can also use the tax code in order to do it. So at the end of the day, nobody falls through the cracks in our vision, but those who would rather have the private care still have that choice.
Absolutely. So just to be totally clear, those who are undocumented, those who are homeless, everything like that, they would be enrolled through your plan.
Well, if you're homeless, chances are we will have you on Medicaid. We just need to make sure we get you enrolled. Undocumented people should have the opportunity to buy into the plan. Okay. And I think that we benefit when everybody is able to get some kind of coverage. And, the long-term answer, of course, is to have comprehensive immigration reform so that people who are undocumented today have a pathway to be citizens tomorrow. And then we won't have that question lingering over any of our policies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you were critical over Warren being unable to explain, how she paid for it. How are you going to pay for it? What's your plan?
Sure. So the vast majority of the costs of my plan can be covered by rolling back these unnecessary Trump corporate tax cuts that went mainly to the wealthy. That'll cover all but about $100 billion of our plan. You might say $100 billion sounds like a lot, and you're right. But we have a plan to cover that part too. That's where our prescription drug plan comes in. So I got a plan to make sure that prescription drugs become more affordable in this country. A big part of that is allowing the federal government and Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And independent estimates of these kinds of policies suggest that we should be able to raise probably $200 or $300 billion actually in savings to the Treasury by moving in that direction over the next decade. So we're talking about something that not only makes sense for American consumers, that we have a savings individually, but also saves money for the taxpayer as a whole. And some of those savings can be applied to carry the part of the cost of Medicare for all who want it.
And would it be like a total remake of Affordable Care, or would it be something completely different that you would have to get through Congress and everything?
Well, we would have to work with Congress in order to enact this. It's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have a nominee with coattails who can help deliver the right kind of House and Senate. But what I'll say is there is a very strong American majority for getting this done. So in the same way that even when the Republicans had control of everything, they couldn't dismantle the ACA because most Americans wanted it. A real advantage of my plan is that most Americans want that too. What most Americans aren't so sure about is the idea of being kicked off of their private plan in 4 years or less. And I just think it's a mistake. Never mind the politics of it. I just don't think it's the right policy. I think a better policy is to make sure everybody gets coverage in a way that honors individuals' chance to have the freedom to choose.
So part of the debate, fallout, whatever you want to call it, over the last week, you've seen, supporters of those campaigns, which are very large campaigns, very popular campaigns. They're now starting to call into question sort of your progressive background, basically. Is Mayor Pete a progressive? I know you have identified that way previously, but they say, not Medicare for all, doing the big money fundraisers and things like that. You're speaking tonight at a progressive event here in Las Vegas. So just ultimately, are you a progressive? Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I'm not going to take a back seat to anybody when it comes to being progressive. And whether it's Medicare for all who want it or other measures I'm proposing, they would make me the most progressive president of our lifetimes. Now, of course, when you start doing better, some of your competitors start getting a little more negative, and that's just politics. But I'm not worried about that. What I'm convinced we need to do is implement bold and progressive ideas and do it in a way that we can actually unify people around. We'll never get everybody, but we have a strong American majority for the things I'm proposing. And for a dangerously divided country, the opportunity and I think the necessity ahead is to enact these bold ideas and do it in a way that brings us together.
So on this healthcare issue, and this is the last little bit because we've been talking a lot about it already, it definitely seems like when you're on the debate stage that sometimes you get almost sort of frustrated with the fact that, you have these politicians who are talking these big pie in the sky ideas like a Medicare for all that would be insanely expensive, almost impossible to get through the House, the Senate, and things like that. And there have been multiple moments on that stage where I've noticed that you kind of bring everybody, like, see, this is why folks in Ohio, in Iowa, in Idaho, all over these places, this is why they get disillusioned with politics and things like that. How important do you think it is to kind of like rein in whatever Democratic policy ideas are coming out of this field to something that's practical and something that can appeal to people who might be on the fence in sort of the middle of the country?
Yeah, I get fired up about this because as a mayor who works outside of Washington, I'm used to being accountable for getting things done. And I've seen so many issue areas where there's been talk for years and years and years, and very little has actually changed. You look at immigration, last time we had a big reform was when Reagan was president. You look at healthcare, we've been talking about these things for a long time. Certainly the ACA was a jump forward, but we got so much more work to do. And I want to make sure we don't get wrapped around the axle on the politics of it. Of course, there's one-upmanship that always goes on during a primary season. But we have this golden moment in front of us where the American people are with us to make big changes, and there's a way to get it done. We have a responsibility not to lose sight of that and to have the discipline to focus on these opportunities and to focus also on things that we can explain how they're going to be paid for. Because if we increase the debt even further than necessary, and I'm proposing we not increase it at all, this is going to be a problem for my generation, which will be here when sooner or later some of these financial time bombs go off too. So I think it's very important that we make promises that we can actually keep, and we can make very bold promises if there's a plan to keep them. That's what my campaign's committed to doing, and I get frustrated sometimes when the talk accelerates without much of a sense of how it's going to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, I mean, what would you say about people who think that, that talk is sort of important because it's important to be aspirational when you're running for the top office? Would you say aspirational, but also, as within the realm of possibility? At
the end of the day, my competitors will each have their approach and I've got mine. But mine is to offer, again, some of the biggest things we've ever done. I mean, to be able to actually do this in healthcare would be huge. It'd be the biggest thing we've done in more than a half century. To really deliver a meaningful immigration reform, to get a package of gun laws that would save thousands of lives. These are things that would represent a giant leap. So I'm not going to take a backseat on the idea that these are bold. I'm just saying that we also have to have the discipline to focus on what those ideas are, explain how we're going to pay for them, and bring the American people along so that they can actually get achieved.
Absolutely. We have got just a couple more I wanted to ask real quick. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you about too is, so say you make it through the field and it's you and it's Trump and he's got probably $1 billion. I mean, truthfully, to spend against you in a very short amount of time. You're new to the national political scene. What's the path forward for you, in terms of beating him in states that he won narrowly, in 2016, states with a lot of suburban folks who maybe don't agree with a lot that he does, but, like their healthcare, like whatever. I mean, what is your pitch to those folks?
One of the things we're seeing even now is a lot of folks crossing over, coming to me at events saying, look, I've always voted Republican, but I'm looking for something different this time and I'm going to support you. There are a lot of Republicans and conservatives who are disgusted with what's happening in their own party, with what this president has done. And we've got to make sure to welcome them. And I do. It's not that we're going to agree. I'm not going to pretend to be more conservative than I am, but I am going to offer a plan for America that's rooted in values that we all ought to be able to share and make sure it's clear how the policies I'm putting forward are going to make Americans' lives better. I think it's a winning message in the primary. I think it's a winning message against Donald Trump in the general. The other thing that we're doing is building right now the kind of robust, strong, top-to-bottom organization with grassroots energy that has powered us up to this point, but is also what it's going to take to go up against a sitting president of the United States who is amassing resources right and left and will pull out all of the stops to try to stay in power.
Absolutely. And the last thing I just wanted to ask you about, another interesting moment on the debate, had to do with foreign policy and specifically what's going on in northern Syria. I read earlier this week, I think it was NBC News, that the U.S. diplomatic corps is honestly worried that the country might be found as an accomplice or as a part of war crimes. Is that something, in your whole life, your time as a Marine, I mean, everything, do you ever picture something like this happening in the United States?
I never thought I'd see the day when a president would betray allies in this way. We're talking about Kurdish allies who put their lives on the line to stand with the United States fighting against terrorists. And the reason I'm fired up about this is because I know that when I was deployed, the flag on my shoulder was one of the things that kept me safe. And it kept me safe because we were a country known to keep its word, that our allies and our enemies knew that this is a country that will stand by those who stand with us. The president destroyed that, and he destroyed it for no good reason. It's not that there was some emergency that required us suddenly to make a terrible, difficult choice and change policy. He changed the policy after a phone call. And if we have a president who is this easily manipulated and who cares so little for American allies, what that does is it undercuts the entire strength of American moral authority. The idea that we're a reliable ally, the idea that we stand up for our values, which are also values that people around the world share. When we lose that, when the president destroys that, that makes the world a more dangerous place, especially for Americans. So what I'm worried about is not only the atrocities that appear to be playing out in Syria, not only the apparent resurgence of ISIS that could happen because so many captives are being let free because of this abrupt departure of the U.S., but bigger than that, anywhere in the world, anytime in the next years, when the United States needs to recruit allies to put their lives on the line to be alongside us, it's going to be that much harder for our troops because of this president's betrayal of our allies in Syria.